Aliyah, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Great to be back.
Can you give us a little background on the U.S., the federal Indian boarding schools?
Sure. So federal Indian boarding schools started with a piece of legislation, the Indian Civilization Act in 1819. And of course, this made light federal boarding schools. But before that, there, of course, were boarding schools that were run by churches or other religious institutions. So it really wasn't until 1819 that, in terms of the U.S. government funding and operating these schools, that it started happening. As I'm sure is true for many Indigenous folks in Canada, so many Native people in the United States have stories of their grandmothers or grandfathers who were taken from their communities and placed into these schools. And of course, we always knew anecdotally that there was really traumatic things that happened at these boarding schools. And so now this investigation by the Interior Department is really validating what Indigenous people have known for hundreds of years already.
Yeah, Aliyah, what can you tell us about some of the findings from this report?
Sure. So this report is over 100 pages long. It's 106 pages, actually. And it's what we know is the first volume. So we assume that to mean that there's going to be more volumes. We're not quite sure how many at this point. But essentially what it found is that there were a total of 408 federal boarding schools from the years 1819 to 1969, which is about a 150-year time period. And these schools were located across 37 states, I believe, and that includes Alaska and Hawaii, which were territories of the United States at the time. They weren't formally given statehood yet. But so far what we know is that, we have maps of where these schools were located. They were located across various states. And then we also, from the report, learned what kinds of conditions that Native children had to endure at these schools, which, as I just mentioned, are a lot of the same things of Native children being taken forcefully from their homes, but also other things like given white names instead of their traditional names in their native languages. Native kids had their hair cut, and there was a number of other horrible conditions that these Native kids had to face at these schools.
Very similar to north of the border here. Aliyah, what has been the reaction to the findings and the release of this report?
I'd say there's been a big mix of reaction. There's been everything from a lot of sorrow and a lot of weeping. We've heard from boarding school survivors who have said that this felt like opening wounds for them. ICT spoke to a woman yesterday who said that when she was at boarding school, it was the loneliest she ever felt in her life. On the same token, however, we also heard these survivors say that they felt really hopeful because on the mainstream news channels here in the United States, we're seeing news organizations actually covering this. And what's really funny is that for Native people, this is a chapter in our history that is so prominent and so big. And yet a lot of everyday Americans, a lot of everyday non-Native Americans didn't know about this. And this is the first time that they're really learning about it. I saw a lot of discourse on social media yesterday. And so it really seems like, the dominant American culture is finally realizing what happened.
Important, and sure. Aliyah, just quickly here, like you say, it's volume 1. What are the next steps in all of this?
Sure. Well, federal officials are calling for the United States Congress to provide more funding so that they can continue this research. I know specifically that federal officials have called for wanting more information about burial sites of Native children who could have, died at these boarding schools. And then in addition to that, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland has announced that she will be conducting a Road to Healing tour, which basically means she'll be traveling around the country, meeting directly with survivors and talking to them about their experiences.
Aliyah, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate this. We'll be watching Indian Country today for the latest.
Sure. Well, thank you so much.